The call came in at 2:11 a.m. from a house that had been condemned since 1983, and the voice on the line knew my name before I spoke. I need to say that clearly right at the start, because that's the part people keep asking me to walk back. They want me to say I misheard, that the dispatcher relayed my name first, that the timestamp was off, or the address was wrong, or that I'm compressing two separate calls into one memory. I've heard every version of the reasonable explanation. I held on to a few of them myself for a while. But the recording exists. Internal Affairs has it. The dispatch log has it. And the voice is there, flat and clear, saying my last name, Moten, a full second and a half before the dispatcher patches me through. I can't make that not be true. I've tried. My name is Danielle Moten. I was a patrol officer with NOPD's 2nd District from 2019 to 2024. Badge number 4417. I'm not on the force anymore. I resigned because I could not get a single person in the department to do what the department exists to do: follow up. I want to go in order. The chronology is the only part of this that hasn't shifted on me. Everything else, the explanations, the institutional posture, Ray's memory, the case file itself, changes depending on who you ask and when. The dates don't change. The address doesn't change. The address is 1427 Coliseum Street. It sits about 2 blocks off Magazine, on the riverside edge of the Lower Garden District. If you've walked that stretch, you've probably passed it. Double gallery Italianate frame house, built around 1856, or what's left of one. The front gallery sags nearly to grade. The left side wall has partially separated from the roof structure. Every window on the 2nd floor is gone. The lot behind it has gone fully feral. Banana trees, elephant ear, Virginia creeper up to the roof line. The city condemned it in 1983 after a partial ceiling collapse. That's 41 years before the night I'm talking about. It has no electrical service, no water, no gas. Entergy confirmed disconnection in 1984. Sewerage and water board records show the water meter was pulled that same year. There is no active utility account at that address under any name. I confirmed this personally, and then confirmed it a second time through a records request that took 11 weeks to process. There is no one living there. There hasn't been anyone living there within the lifespan of any active NOPD officer. And on November 14th, 2024, at 2:11 a.m., someone inside that house called 911. I was working 3rd watch out of the 2nd District station on Magazine. It was a Thursday, technically Friday morning, quiet night. I'd handled a noise complaint on Felicity around midnight, a parking dispute on Britannia maybe an hour later. Standard. The kind of shift where you spend more time writing supplementals than driving. Dispatch radioed me at 2:09, code 2, non-emergency response, an open 911 line from 1427 Coliseum. No verbal contact. The call had come in, the line was open, and dispatch could hear what they described as ambient sound, not silence, sound. They asked me to do a welfare check. I acknowledged and started heading that direction. I was maybe 6 blocks out. I remember the streets were wet. It had rained earlier that evening, one of those November rains that doesn't cool anything down, just puts a film on everything. The streetlights on Coliseum were doing that thing they do after rain, where the light sits on the road surface like oil. I pulled up at 2:14. I remember checking the time because the Mountain Daylight Time, the mobile data terminal in the car, had logged my arrival, and I glanced at it out of habit. The house was dark. obviously. It's always dark, but I want to be precise about that because later, people asked whether I saw any light from inside. I didn't. Not at that point. I called dispatch and asked them to confirm the address. They confirmed 1427 Coliseum. I told them the location was a condemned structure, no occupants, and asked whether the call had come from a cell or a landline. There was a pause, then the dispatcher. And I'll leave her name out of this, though she's corroborated everything I'm about to say. Told me the call had come in on a landline. I asked her to repeat that. She said, "Landline, hardwired. The system had flagged it with the address automatically. That's how 911 routing works for landlines. The address is tied to the physical line, not a GPS ping. So the system was telling us that a hardwired telephone inside a house with no electrical service, no active utility accounts, and no occupants for 4 decades had just placed a 911 call." I sat in the car for a minute. I'm not going to pretend I didn't. I sat there and I looked at the house and I thought about what I was going to write in the report. Because that's what I was thinking, not fear, not excitement, just how do I document this in a way that doesn't make me look like I'm confused? That's the part people don't understand about patrol work. Half the job is managing the record. You learn very quickly that what you write follows you more than what you do. Now, before I tell you what I found on the second floor of that house, I need to tell you something I only learned weeks later, because it reframes everything that happened when I went inside. What I found up there was a telephone, a physical working telephone, in a locked room. And when I say locked, I don't mean stuck or swollen shut. I mean a modern deadbolt, a schlag, installed on the hallway side of an interior door in a house no one has occupied since Ronald Reagan's first term. Someone had put that lock there recently, and they'd locked it from the outside. But the thing that was inside that room, the thing that made the call, wasn't just a phone. It was part of something much older, something that started long before Marie-Hélène Deslondes died in that house in 1979, something I think she was trying to finish. And I walked into the middle of it. So bear with me for the next few minutes. I'll tell you exactly what I saw and heard that night. But first, I need to show you the history that was already waiting in that room, arranging itself around a rotary phone. I got out and approached on foot. Standard flashlight, radio on my left shoulder. I walked up the front path, or what was the front path. The brick had heaved so badly from root intrusion that it was more like walking on loose rubble. The front steps were rotted through on the left side. I went up the right side, testing each tread. The front door was not secured. It was closed but not latched. The jamb had swollen or shifted enough that the door just sort of rested in the frame. I pushed it open with my flashlight hand. The smell is the first thing I want to document because it wasn't what I expected. Condemned houses in New Orleans have a specific smell: mold, standing water, animal waste, rot. This had some of that, but underneath it was something drier, like calcium powder, like chalk dust. It was strongest in the foyer and faded as I moved deeper in. I have never been able to identify it. The foyer opened into a central hall, typical layout for the period. The hall runs straight back to the rear of the house, with rooms opening on either side. The plaster was down to the lath in most places. The floor was intact, but soft. Heart pine that had gone punky from moisture. I swept the first room on the right, empty. I swept the first room on the left, empty. Debris in both. Broken plaster, a collapsed shelf, a curtain rod on the floor. Nothing unusual, I was halfway down the hall when dispatch came through my radio again. The dispatcher told me the line was still open. And then she said something that changed the entire texture of the night. She said, "Moten, there's a voice now." I stopped walking. I asked her what the voice was saying. She said it wasn't saying anything to her. It had said one word when it came through. She asked me to stand by. I could hear her consulting with someone, probably the shift supervisor. Then she came back and said the word was Moten, my name, spoken on the open 911 line, originating from the house I was standing inside. I want to be honest about what I felt. It wasn't terror. It was a kind of thermal drop. Like the temperature of my thinking fell by several degrees. Everything got very precise. I was aware of the weight of my belt, the position of my feet, the texture of the floor under my boots. My hand was on my sidearm, but that was automatic. I wasn't drawing on a voice. I cleared the rest of the first floor. Kitchen. Collapsed. Rear room. Inaccessible. Floor compromised. Side room. Empty. No phone, no wiring that could carry a signal. I checked. I specifically looked for a phone line coming into the house, and what I found was a junction box on the exterior east wall that had been disconnected and spray painted over, probably decades ago. The wire had been cut at the box. There was no interior continuation. I went upstairs. The staircase was narrow and steep, which is typical for these houses. The treads held, but they flexed badly. I tested each one. The second floor had 3 rooms and what had been a bathroom. The bathroom ceiling had come down entirely. I could see the sky through the roof. The 2 front rooms were empty. The rear room was locked. Not stuck, not swollen shut. Locked. A keyed deadbolt on the hallway side. Hardware that was not original to the house. It was modern. Brass. A schlag, or something very close to it. In a house that hadn't been occupied since 1983, someone had installed a modern deadbolt on an interior door from the hallway side, locking something in or keeping something out. I radioed dispatch and reported the locked door. I requested backup. While I waited, I put my ear to the door. I don't know why. It wasn't procedure, but I did it. I heard a dial tone. A landline dial tone, steady and clean, coming from the other side of a locked door on the second floor of a house with no electrical service and no phone line. Backup arrived at 2:38. Officer Raymond Jervis, 2nd District. Ray had about 3 years more experience than I did. I briefed him at the base of the stairs. He went up with me. He listened at the door. He heard it too. He confirmed this in his supplemental report, which I've read. His exact phrasing was, "a continuous tone consistent with an active telephone line." We made the decision to breach. I kicked the door just below the lock. It took 2 hits. The frame splintered and the door swung in. The room was empty. I need to qualify that. The room was empty of furniture, of people, of any obvious source for what we'd heard. But it was not empty of. I'm going to use the word evidence because that's what it was. On the floor, centered in the room, was a rotary telephone, cream-colored, Western Electric 500 series. I know this because I looked it up later. The handset was off the cradle, resting on the floor beside the base. The coiled cord connected the handset to the body. The line cord ran from the base of the phone across the floor to the baseboard, where it disappeared into a small hole that had been drilled through the plaster and lath. The dial tone was coming from the handset. Ray and I stood in the doorway for what I estimate was 15 to 20 seconds without speaking. I remember him shifting his flashlight from the phone to the hole in the wall and back. Neither of us entered the room. I don't think either of us made a conscious decision not to. We just didn't. I radioed dispatch and asked whether the 911 line was still open. She confirmed it was. I asked her to have the caller, whatever the caller was, make a sound so I could verify that the open line and the phone in front of me were the same connection. She didn't respond for several seconds. Then she said she'd try. Through my radio, I heard her speak into the 911 line. She said, "This is NOPD dispatch. Can you identify yourself?" And from the handset on the floor, clearly without distortion, I heard a woman's voice say, "He's already in the room." Ray stepped back. He physically stepped back from the doorway. I didn't. I was looking at the phone and trying to process the fact that the voice had come from the handset, but had also been audible through my radio, because dispatch was still patched in. The two signals were the same. The phone on the floor of a condemned house was the source of the 911 call. Dispatch asked me to repeat my status. I said I was code 4. Fine. I wasn't fine, but I also wasn't in physical danger that I could identify. Ray said we should clear the room and leave. I told him I wanted to trace the phone line first. He said he didn't think that was a good idea. I entered the room. The floor felt solid. More solid than the hallway, actually. The boards were tight. No flex. I crouched next to the phone and looked at the line cord where it entered the baseboard. The hole was clean. Drilled, not broken. Recently. The plaster around it was white, not stained. I pulled the cord gently, and it had tension on it. It was connected to something on the other side of the wall. I picked up the handset. The dial tone was gone. The line was silent. Not dead. Silent. There's a difference. A dead line has a specific flat quality. This was an open line with nothing on it, like someone was there, not speaking. I said, "This is Officer Moten, NOPD. Who am I speaking with?" Nothing. Then, and I am going to be very careful here because this is the part that has caused me the most trouble. I heard breathing, not loud, not theatrical, just someone breathing through their nose on the other end of a telephone line that could not exist. I put the handset down. I told Ray we were leaving. We secured the scene, which in practical terms meant pulling the door as closed as we could and placing a patrol hold on the address. We went back to the station and I wrote my report. Ray wrote his. We both filed before end of shift. This is where the story could stop being mine. In a normal department, in a normal situation, this is where a detective picks it up, or a sergeant reviews it and flags it for follow-up, or at minimum someone from property crimes or even the utility company comes out and checks the wiring. Something procedural happens. The system does what it does. Nothing happened. My report was received. I know this because it was logged into the records management system with a case number. I have that number. Ray's supplemental was attached. Dispatch's log was attached, including the recording. It all went in. And then nothing. I waited 3 days. I checked the case status. It was listed as inactive. No further action required. No detective assigned. No follow-up authorized. No notation explaining why a 911 call from a condemned building with an active, impossible phone line required no further action. I went to my sergeant, Darren Montrose. I'd been under Montrose for about 2 years, and I had no complaints about him. He was competent, direct, and didn't play politics. I asked him about the case. He pulled it up, read it, and told me it had been reviewed by the district commander and classified as a phone system routing error. A routing error. I asked him how a routing error produces a physical telephone in a locked room. He looked at me for a long moment and said, "Moten, I'm telling you what the classification is." That was the end of the conversation. Not because I accepted it, but because I understood what he was telling me. He was telling me the explanation had come from above him and that he was not going to help me challenge it. That's a specific kind of silence in the NOPD. It's not hostility, it's self-preservation. So I started looking into it on my own time, off-duty, unpaid, unofficial. And the first thing I found is the thing that reframed everything. Because it told me the house on Coliseum Street didn't just have a strange night, it had a strange century. The property record for 1427 Coliseum is public. Built 1856 by Émile Vautrin, a cotton factor. Purchased in 1971 by Marie-Hélène Deslondes, the last listed occupant. Marie-Hélène Deslondes died in 1979. The house was condemned in 1983, 4 years after its owner was dead. During those 4 years, the property was listed as in probate. No heirs identified, no estate representative appointed, taxes went unpaid, liens accumulated. But no sheriff's sale was ever conducted, no tax auction. The property just stayed. For over 40 years, it remained in the name of a dead woman, and no one touched it. In New Orleans, that's less unusual than it sounds, but most of those properties are in areas with low land value. 1427 Coliseum is in the Lower Garden District, 2 blocks off Magazine. The lot alone is worth between $400,000 and $700,000. Properties like that don't get forgotten. They get fought over, unless something prevents the fight. I pulled the succession file for Deslondes from the clerk of court. 3 documents, a death certificate, a probate notice, and a single-page letter I have never seen in any other succession file. The letter was from a firm called Marchessault and Louvière, which closed in 1987. It stated that the decedent had expressed a testamentary preference for indefinite preservation of the property in its current state, and requested the court delay any disposition pending. And I need you to hear this phrase exactly. Completion of an ongoing arrangement. Ongoing arrangement. Dated February 1980. 3 months after Deslondes died. The court honored the request. The succession was never closed. As of the day I pulled the file, the matter of Deslondes, Marie-Hélène, succession number 79-14423, was listed as active and pending. 45 years open, for a property worth $500,000. Because a dead law firm asked the court to wait for an arrangement to complete. Now I need to tell you about Cecile. Because Cecile is the reason I know this wasn't a one-time event, and what she told me is the reason I went back to that house a 3rd time, which is the visit I haven't been able to undo. Cecile Landry is a retired NOPD dispatcher. She worked the 911 center from 1993 to 2016. I found her by asking around the dispatch center, quietly, off the record, whether anyone had ever received a call from a condemned address. Most active dispatchers didn't know or didn't want to talk. One of them told me to call Cecile. I reached her at her home in Gentilly. 71 years old, sharp. When I told her I was asking about a 911 call from 1427 Coliseum, she was quiet for about 5 seconds. Then she said, "What year?" 2 words, and they rearranged everything. Because they meant this had happened before. Cecile told me she took a call from that address in 2003. Open line, no voice initially. She dispatched an officer. He reported the house empty. No phone found. But the line stayed open for over an hour. She flagged it and was told by her supervisor to close it out as a line fault. Then it happened again in 2007. Same address, Open line. This time there was a voice, a woman's voice, calm, almost formal. The voice said one sentence. Cecile remembered it exactly, nearly 20 years later. The voice said, "The arrangement is not yet complete." The same word, arrangement. The same word the dead lawyers used in their letter to the court in 1980. Cecile reported it. She was told the call was a system echo, a known Bell South artifact. Cecile told me it wasn't storming that night. She checked. She remembered checking because she knew they'd try to explain it away, and she wanted to be ready. After 2007, Cecile started keeping her own records, a spiral notebook in her locker. She logged every anomalous call. 4 more times between 2008 and 2015, the system logged a call from 1427 Coliseum Street. 4 more times. Cecile told me the calls followed a pattern, always between 2 and 3 a.m., always registered as landline. Always began as open lines with ambient sound, and when they progressed to voice, the voice always referenced the listener. In 2008, the voice said the name of the dispatcher on duty. In 2011, it referenced a case number from an unrelated investigation the responding officer had been working that week. In 2013, no voice. But the ambient sound was later described by 2 dispatchers as music, a piano, playing something repetitive and unresolved. One of them said it sounded like someone practicing a single passage over and over without ever reaching the end. In 2015, Cecile's final year, the voice said, "She almost finished." Cecile retired 3 months later. The 2 dispatchers who corroborated the 2013 call both left the department within a year. I asked Cecile who she was. She said her best answer was Marie-Hélène Deslondes. I asked why. She said, "Because I looked her up, and what I found doesn't match a woman who just died in a house." She wouldn't elaborate when I described my night. The locked room, the dial tone, the voice saying my name, the breathing. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said something I'm going to carry for the rest of my life. She said, "It's changed. It didn't used to have a body. I didn't understand what that meant. I spent weeks turning it over. I'm not sure I fully understand it now, but I'm closer than I was." And what got me closer was what I found when I went back to the house. Before that, though, I kept pulling at the history. Marie-Hélène Deslondes, born 1923, occupation, music instructor, died 1979. In the New Orleans Public Library's Louisiana Division, I found a single item related to her, a printed recital program from 1977. It was for a student recital at 1427 Coliseum. At the bottom, in italics, was the line, "Instruction by Madame Deslondes." Continuing the work of the Vautrin Conservatory, established 1859. The Vautrin Conservatory. The house had been built by Émile Vautrin, but apparently also the founder of something called a conservatory. In 1859, in a private home, I found almost nothing else. A single mention in a French-language New Orleans newspaper from 1861, a social column noting that Madame Vautrin had resumed her program of musical education for the young ladies of the parish. That's all. But Marie-Hélène Deslondes, 120 years later, was describing her own teaching practice as a continuation of it, as if it had never stopped. I went back to the house a 3rd time, December 7th, night, alone, off duty. I brought a flashlight, a digital recorder, and a prepaid phone. I told myself I was documenting the wire inside the wall. I told myself this was about the physical evidence. But I think, honestly, I went back because of what Cecile had said. It didn't used to have a body. I wanted to understand what she meant by that, and I think I believed that the house would show me. The front door was open this time, not resting in the frame. Open, about 18 inches, enough to walk through without touching it. The smell had changed. The mineral undertone was stronger, and there was something else beneath it. Not rot, not decay, but something organic in a different way, like the smell of a room where someone has been sitting for a long time. Warm air, human presence. Except there was no warmth. The temperature inside was, if anything, colder than outside. I went upstairs. The door to the rear room was open. I entered. The phone was back. Same phone, same position. Cream-colored Western Electric 500, centered in the room, handset off the cradle. The line cord ran to the same hole in the baseboard. But there was something additional. Next to the phone, arranged neatly on the floor, was a stack of sheet music. I crouched down and looked at it without touching it. The pages were old, yellowed, brittle at the edges, but not ruined. They'd been stored carefully. The top sheet was handwritten, not printed. Handwritten musical notation in ink on staff paper. The title at the top read, Exercice pour la main gauche, number 14. Below it, C. Vautrin, 1862. Celestine Vautrin. Writing piano exercises in 1862, in this house. There were more pages beneath it. I could see edges of different paper stock, different handwriting. Some appeared much older, some looked newer. One page near the bottom had a printed copyright date of 1974. I reached for the stack. The phone rang. I don't mean the dial tone came back. I mean the phone rang. The mechanical bell inside the Rotary housing activated and the phone rang once in a house with no electrical service, on a line that AT&T says doesn't exist. I stood up. I did not pick up the phone. I did not touch the sheet music. I stood and I backed toward the door, and I felt, this is the part I struggle with. I felt as though I was being rude, as though I had been invited somewhere and was leaving before the host was ready. It was not fear. It was a social sensation. The same mild guilt you'd feel leaving a dinner party too early. And that was more disturbing to me than any sound or sight in that house, because it meant something in that room was operating on a level that bypassed my rational assessment and went directly to my behavioral instincts. I left. I drove home. I sat in my car in my own driveway for 20 minutes before I went inside. The next day, I pulled up the case in the records management system to add a supplemental. The case was gone, not closed, not inactive, gone. The case number I had, the one I had written down, the one I had referenced in my own notes, returned no results. I searched by address. Nothing. I searched by date. Nothing. I searched by my name. Every other report I'd ever filed was there. The one for 1427 Coliseum was not. I went to Ray Jervis. I asked him if he still had his supplemental. He looked at me with an expression I'm going to describe as careful. He said he didn't know what I was talking about. He said he hadn't been to that address. When I described the night to him, the locked door, the dial tone, the voice, he listened, and then he said, "Moten, I think you might be mixing up shifts." He wasn't confused. His eyes were completely clear. He was choosing not to remember. I went to dispatch and asked for the audio recording. The recording that I knew existed because I had heard my own name spoken on it. The shift supervisor told me the recording had been archived routinely and could only be accessed through a formal internal affairs request. I filed the request. It was denied on the basis that no case existed matching my description. None of this felt like a cover-up. It didn't have the texture of people actively working to hide something. It felt like the record was healing, like I'd made an incision in something and the tissue was closing over the wound on its own. Nobody was panicking. Nobody was threatening me. The information was simply becoming absent, the way a footprint fills in with water. I stopped trying to recover the record and started researching the house itself. What I found was not a conspiracy. It was a lineage. Célestine Vautrin, née Célestine Broussard, was born in 1834. She married Émile Vautrin in 1854. They built the house on Coliseum Street in 1856. Célestine was a pianist. She began teaching privately in 1859. The conservatory was never a formal institution. It was Célestine's practice of teaching young women piano in her home, which she continued until her death in 1901. After Célestine died, the house passed to her daughter, Amélie. Amélie Vautrin never married. She continued the teaching practice. She died in 1934. The house passed to a niece, Odette Vautrin Castille, who also taught piano in the house until her death in 1969. The house sat empty for 2 years. Then, in 1971, Marie-Hélène Deslondes purchased it. She was not a Vautrin. There was no genealogical connection I could find, but she bought the house and immediately resumed teaching piano. The 1977 recital program described her work as a continuation of the Vautrin Conservatory. 4 women, 4 generations of piano instruction, all in the same house, all unmarried or widowed, all dying in or near the house. And after the last one died, the house refused to be sold, refused to be torn down, refused to be absorbed back into the city's property cycle. It just sat there for 45 years, with an open succession and a dead attorney's request for the court to wait. The arrangement is not yet complete. I found one more thing, and this is the part I've never told anyone. In the Archdiocese archives, I found a baptismal record for Célestine Broussard, dated 1834, at Saint-Martin-de-Tours Catholic Church. The record was standard, except for a marginal notation in a different hand, added later, possibly much later. The notation was in French. Translated, it read, "This child has been offered to the music and will return to it." I don't know who wrote that. I don't know when. The archivist couldn't tell me. The ink was different from the original entry, but the paper was the same page. Someone had opened the register and added that line to the baptismal record of a woman who would, 25 years later, begin teaching piano in a house that would still be calling 911 160 years after that. I resigned from NOPD on February 3rd, 2025. My stated reason was personal. The actual reason was that I had come to understand something about the house on Coliseum Street that I could not fit inside the professional framework I'd built my career on. The house is not haunted. I don't believe that. Haunting implies something left behind, something residual, something that doesn't know it's dead. Whatever is in that house knows exactly what it is. It's not finished. The arrangement, the conservatory, the teaching, the music, whatever Célestine Vautrin started in 1859, is still in progress. It was interrupted by Deslondes' death in 1979, but it was not ended. The succession is still open because the work is still open. The phone calls are not cries for help. They're not echoes. They are, I believe, attempts to continue a lesson. The voice knew my name because I was in the room. the same way a teacher knows the name of anyone who walks into her classroom. The breathing I heard on the line was not a haunting. It was patience. I don't go to that part of the city anymore. I moved to the West Bank, and I take the expressway when I need to go anywhere near Magazine Street. I don't avoid it out of fear exactly. I avoid it because the last time I drove past the block. In February, middle of the day, windows up. I heard a piano, not from the house, not from any house, from inside my car. A single passage, repeated, like someone practicing, like someone trying to get it right. A left-hand exercise, low register, slow and precise. It lasted about 30 seconds. Then it stopped. I pulled over and sat there. The street was quiet. A man was walking his dog. A woman was getting out of her car with grocery bags. Normal, completely normal. But I could still feel the keys, not hear them, feel them in my left hand. A muscle memory for something I've never played. My fingers were moving. Not dramatically, not like a spasm. Just small, specific movements. The kind you'd make if you were working through a difficult passage on a keyboard that wasn't there. It stopped after a minute. My hand went still. I drove home. I've told this to one person, a friend who's a therapist, not because I think I'm unwell, but because I needed to hear myself say it out loud to someone who would listen clinically. She asked me if the sensation had returned. I told her it hadn't. That was a lie. It comes back every few days, always in the left hand, always the same passage, always when I'm still, sitting at a desk, lying in bed before sleep, waiting at a red light. The fingers move, and there's a physical precision to it that I cannot attribute to random nerve activity because it's not random. It's structured, it has rhythm, interval, and repetition. It's practice. I don't play piano. I've never played piano. I took no music lessons as a child. There is no framework in my biography for what my hand is doing. Cecile was right. It didn't used to have a body. Now it's looking for one. I still have the case number written on a scrap of paper in my wallet. Sometimes I take it out and look at it. The number that returns no results in any system. The number for a case that, according to every record, never existed. But I was there. Ray was there, whatever he says now. The dispatcher heard it. Cecile heard it, years before me. And somewhere in the sealed files of a defunct law firm, in a box in a courthouse basement, there's a document that explains what Célestine Vautrin started in that house in 1859, and what Marie-Hélène Deslondes was continuing when she died, and what has been waiting patiently on an open phone line for someone to sit down and finish the lesson. The arrangement is not yet complete. I know that now. I know it in my left hand. And I'm starting to worry that knowing it is the first step toward completing it, that the calls were never about reaching the police. They were about reaching someone, anyone, who would come into that room and stay long enough for the music to find somewhere new to live. I didn't stay, but I think I stayed long enough. 3 nights ago, I woke up at 2:11 a.m. I was sitting at my kitchen table. I don't sleepwalk. I've never sleepwalked. But I was sitting at the table with my hands in front of me, positioned about shoulder width apart, fingers curved, resting on the wood surface as if it were a keyboard. My left hand was mid-passage. I pulled my hands back and sat there in the dark. The kitchen was silent. The house was silent. But for just a moment, just at the edge of hearing, just at the threshold where sound and imagination become indistinguishable, I thought I heard a dial tone, and I understood with a clarity that felt borrowed that it wasn't a telephone. It was a tuning note,